The dusty streets of Calico, California, seemed to hold their breath every evening at 6 o'clock when Willa Garrison's clear voice rang out from the small wooden building at the end of Main Street, reading tales of adventure and romance to those who could no longer see the world with their own eyes. It was the summer of 1885, and the silver mining town nestled in the Mojave Desert had seen better days, though it still bustled with enough life to keep hope alive in the hearts of its residents. Willa had arrived 3 months earlier, a young woman of 22 with auburn hair that caught fire in the sunset and eyes the color of sage after rain. She had come to Calico seeking a fresh start after her father's death in a mining accident back in Colorado, carrying nothing but 2 trunks of belongings and a fierce determination to make something of herself. The blind residents of Calico had been meeting informally for years, gathering in whatever space they could find, isolated and often forgotten by the bustling town around them. When Willa learned of their existence from Mrs. Chen at the general store, something stirred in her heart. Her own grandmother had lost her sight in her final years, and Willa remembered the joy that reading aloud had brought to both of them. Within a week, she had convinced the town council to let her use the old assayer's office that had been sitting empty since the previous tenant moved on to richer prospects. Now, every evening as the oppressive desert heat began to release its grip on the land, 6 blind residents made their way to that humble building. There was old Thomas Riley, who had been a sharpshooter until an accident with black powder took his vision. Sarah Montgomery, a former schoolteacher struck blind by fever. Young Jacob Chen, born without sight but blessed with a remarkable memory. Martha Williams, whose world had faded to darkness over the course of several years. Robert Gaines, a former miner who had paid the ultimate price for his trade. And finally, Margaret Foster, a woman in her 60s who claimed to see more now than she ever had with working eyes. What Willa did not know was that every evening, for the past 6 weeks, a cowboy had been standing just outside the open window, listening. Zachary Granger was 26 years old, tall and lean from years of hard work, with sun-bleached brown hair and eyes that shifted between gray and blue depending on the light. He had been working at the Silver King mine for the past year, saving every penny he could to buy his own ranch someday. He was not a man given to sentiment or softness. Life had beaten most of that out of him years ago when his mother died and his father drank himself into an early grave. Zachary had been on his own since he was 16, drifting from job to job, town to town, never putting down roots because roots required hope, and hope was a luxury he could not afford. He had first heard Willa's voice by accident, walking past the building on his way back to the boarding house after a long shift underground. She was reading from a novel, something about a woman in England and a mysterious man on the moors. Zachary had meant to keep walking, but something in her voice stopped him. It was not just that she read clearly and with expression, though she did. It was the warmth in her tone, the genuine care she seemed to pour into every word, as though the story mattered deeply to her, and she wanted to share that love with everyone listening. He had stood there for 10 minutes that first evening, hidden in the lengthening shadows, before shaking his head at his own foolishness and walking away. But the next evening he found himself taking the same route, and the next, and the next. Soon it became part of his daily ritual, as essential as breathing. Zachary told himself he was just listening to the stories. He had precious little entertainment in his life, and this was free and harmless. But he knew, somewhere deep down where he refused to examine too closely, that it was more than that. It was her. It was the kindness in her voice when she greeted each person by name, asking about their day. It was the patience she showed when old Thomas interrupted to ask her to repeat a passage. It was the gentle laugh that occasionally broke through when she stumbled over a particularly difficult word. Through that window, listening in the gathering dusk, Zachary Granger saw Willa Garrison's beautiful soul, even though he had never spoken a word to her. On this particular evening in late August, the heat was especially brutal. The thermometer at the general store had climbed past 105 degrees, and even now, with the sun beginning its descent behind the distant mountains, the air shimmered with residual warmth. Zachary positioned himself in his usual spot, leaning against the rough wooden wall where he could hear but not be easily seen. His shift had ended early due to a broken ore cart, giving him extra time before he needed to be anywhere. Inside, Willa was settling into her chair, the same ladder-back wooden chair she used every evening. She had brought a cushion from her room to make it more comfortable, a small luxury she allowed herself. Her fingers traced the familiar cover of the book she had been reading from all week, a collection of stories by Washington Irving. "Good evening, everyone," she said, her voice carrying easily through the small space and out the open window. "I hope you are all staying as cool as possible in this terrible heat." "Cool as a cucumber," Thomas Riley said with a dry laugh, "which is to say, wilted and limp." The others chuckled, and Willa smiled. She loved these people, had grown genuinely fond of each of them over the past months. They came from different backgrounds, different circumstances, but they shared this bond of darkness, and they had welcomed her offering of stories with such gratitude that it moved her deeply. "Well, let us escape this heat for a little while," Willa said. "When we left off yesterday, Rip Van Winkle had just encountered the strange men bowling in the mountains. Shall we see what happens next?" She began to read, her voice rising and falling with the narrative, bringing the old Dutch settler's story to life. Outside, Zachary closed his eyes and let the words wash over him. He had missed the beginning of this story, but had pieced together enough to follow along. There was something soothing about the rhythm of Willa's reading, something that made the ever-present ache of loneliness in his chest ease just a little. When she finished the story, 45 minutes later, there was a collective sigh of satisfaction from her audience. "That was wonderful, dear," Margaret Foster said, "though I confess I feel a bit sorry for poor Rip's wife waiting all those years." "She did not wait," Jacob Chen pointed out. "She died while he was asleep." "Still, imagine her worry before that," Margaret insisted. A lively discussion ensued, and Willa sat back, letting them talk among themselves. This was often the best part of the evening, hearing them engage with the material, debate the characters' choices, relate the stories to their own lives. It reminded her that stories were not just words on a page but living things that grew and changed with each person who encountered them. Eventually, the conversation wound down, and people began to gather their things. Each of Willa's students, as she had come to think of them, had someone who came to walk them home. Family members, mostly, or in Thomas Riley's case, a young neighbor boy who earned a nickel for the service. "Same time tomorrow?" Sarah Montgomery asked as her daughter helped her to her feet. "Same time," Willa confirmed. "We will start a new book. I was thinking perhaps something by Mr. Dickens." "Ooh, I do love Dickens," Martha Williams said. "So much drama." As the room emptied, Willa tidied up, straightening the chairs that had been moved, sweeping the floor with the old broom she kept in the corner. She was just closing up when she heard a sound outside. Not the usual sounds of the town settling into evening, but something closer. Footsteps, perhaps, or the scrape of boots against wood. She stepped outside, looking up and down the quiet street. Most people were home having supper now. The establishments that came alive at night would not open for another hour or so. The street was largely deserted. "Hello," she called out, feeling slightly foolish. "Is someone there?" Zachary had been halfway down the street when he realized he had left his work gloves on the windowsill where he sometimes set them. They were good gloves, expensive, and he could not afford to replace them. Cursing his own carelessness, he had turned back, only to find Willa standing in the doorway. For a long moment, they looked at each other. Zachary took in her appearance properly for the first time, not just glimpses through a window or passing on the street. She was prettier than he had imagined, though that was not quite the right word. There was something about her face that was more than conventional beauty. Intelligence shone in her eyes, and kindness shaped the curve of her mouth. Her dress was simple, well worn but clean and carefully mended, and her hair was coming loose from its pins in soft wisps around her face. Willa studied the man before her with equal curiosity. He was clearly a working man, his clothes dusty and worn, his hands showing the calluses and scars of hard labor. But he stood straight, meeting her gaze directly, and there was something in his expression that was neither threatening nor dismissive. Many men in Calico looked at her with either pity for her unmarried state or speculation about her virtue, living alone as she did. This man's gaze held something different. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. "I apologize for startling you," Zachary said finally, his voice rougher than he intended. He was not used to talking much. "I was just passing by." Something in the way he said it made Willa suspect this was not entirely true, but she saw no reason to challenge him. "No harm done. I thought perhaps one of my students had forgotten something." "Your students," Zachary repeated. "That is a kind thing you do, reading to them." "It is not kindness," Willa said. "It is simply sharing something I love. They give as much to me as I give to them, perhaps more." This statement surprised Zachary. Most people he knew did not speak of charity work in such terms. They wanted credit for their goodness, wanted others to acknowledge their sacrifice. But Willa seemed genuinely to believe what she said. "Still," he said, "it is a good thing." An awkward silence fell between them. Zachary knew he should walk away, but his feet seemed rooted to the dusty ground. Willa felt strangely reluctant to go back inside, though she could not have said why. "I am Willa Garrison," she said finally, deciding to treat this like any other introduction. "Zachary Granger." He touched the brim of his hat. "I work up at the Silver King. That must be hard work." "It is work," he said simply. "Pays steady." Another pause. Somewhere down the street a dog barked. A woman called her children in for supper. "Well," Willa said, "I should be getting home. Mrs. Patterson will have dinner ready soon." "Mrs. Patterson's boarding house?" "Yes, do you know it?" "I stay at Mr. Henderson's place, just 2 streets over." Willa nodded. "Then I suppose we are neighbors in a fashion." "I suppose we are." Zachary watched as she locked the door to the little building, her movements efficient and practiced. When she turned to go, he found himself speaking without planning to. "Would you mind if I walked with you? It is getting dark." Willa hesitated. She was used to walking alone and had never felt particularly unsafe in Calico. But there was something earnest in Zachary's offer, something that told her it came from genuine concern rather than any ulterior motive. "That would be kind of you," she said. They walked in silence for the first block. Willa was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the way he shortened his stride to match hers, the way he positioned himself slightly between her and the street. It was protective without being presumptuous. "How long have you been in Calico?" she asked finally. "About a year now." "You?" "3 months. You came from somewhere else then?" "Colorado. My father worked in the mines there until he was killed in a collapse." "I am sorry." The simple words, spoken with genuine feeling, touched something in Willa. "Thank you," It has been difficult, but I am building a life here. The reading sessions help. They give me purpose. You do not have family, none living. My mother died when I was young and I had no siblings. What about you? The same, more or less. My mother died when I was 14. Father followed a few years later. Zachary did not mention the drinking. It felt like too much to share with someone he had just met, even though he felt strangely comfortable talking to her. They had reached Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, a neat two-story structure with a wide porch and cheerful yellow curtains in the windows. Willa stopped at the gate. "Thank you for walking with me, Mr. Granger." "Zachary, please." "Then you must call me Willa." He nodded, and for a moment their eyes met again. Willa felt a flutter in her chest, something she had not experienced in a long time. Not since before her father died, before grief and hardship had made her forget about such things. "Good evening, Willa," Zachary said softly. "Good evening, Zachary." She watched him walk away, his long stride carrying him quickly down the street until he turned the corner and disappeared from view. Only then did she go inside, her mind full of questions she could not quite articulate. That night, Zachary lay in his narrow bed in the room he shared with two other minors and thought about Willa Garrison. He thought about her voice, yes, but also about the intelligence in her eyes, the way she spoke about her work not as charity but as mutual exchange. He thought about how she had not flinched when he mentioned his lack of family, had not offered empty platitudes or false sympathy. She had simply understood, because she understood what it meant to be alone in the world. For the first time in years, Zachary Granger allowed himself to hope for something beyond mere survival. The next evening, Zachary arrived at his usual spot by the window earlier than normal. He told himself it was because his shift had ended sooner, which was true, but he knew the real reason was that he wanted to see Willa again. He had thought about her all day as he swung his pickaxe in the hot, dark tunnel, counted the hours until he could hear her voice again. She arrived a few minutes before 6, her arms full of books. She was wearing a different dress today, a blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. Zachary watched as she fumbled with the lock while trying to balance her load, and before he could think better of it, he stepped forward. "Let me help you with those." Willa turned, surprised but smiling when she saw him. "Zachary, thank you." He took the books from her, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Even that small contact sent a jolt through him that he did not quite know how to process. "You have quite a collection," he said as she opened the door. "Some are mine, some borrowed from various people around town. Mrs. Chen at the general store has been very generous in lending me books from her personal library." Willa led him inside, gesturing to the small table where he could set the stack down. "You are early today. Shift ended sooner than usual. I could go if you need time to prepare." "No, please stay. I mean, you are welcome to stay." Willa felt her cheeks warm slightly. What was wrong with her? She was not usually so flustered. "Would you like to come in and sit down, instead of standing outside, I mean?" Zachary had not expected this. He glanced toward the window where he usually positioned himself, then back at Willa. "I would not want to intrude." "You would not be intruding. Anyone is welcome to come listen. That is the whole point." Willa arranged her books on the table, not looking at him. Besides, it must be uncomfortable standing out there all this time, so she had known. Zachary felt embarrassment creep up his neck, but when Willa looked at him, there was no judgment in her expression, only a kind of gentle understanding. "I did not mean to spy," he said. "I did not think you did. The window is open for a reason. Sound carries." She smiled. "Jacob mentioned he heard someone out there a few weeks ago. His hearing is remarkable. I wondered who it was." "And you do not mind?" "Why would I mind? If my reading brings someone joy, whether they are inside or outside the room, I am glad of it." Zachary found himself smiling, a real smile that felt unfamiliar on his face. Then yes, I would like to sit inside if the offer still stands. It does. He chose a chair near the back, not wanting to draw attention when the others arrived. Over the next 15 minutes, Willa's students filed in, each greeting her warmly. Zachary noticed how she had a specific word for each person, remembered details of their lives, asked follow-up questions about things they had mentioned in previous sessions. Thomas Riley's grandson had been sick last week, and she asked after him. Martha Williams had been worried about her sister in San Francisco, and Willa inquired whether she had received the letter she was expecting. When everyone was settled, Willa introduced Zachary simply as a friend who would be joining them. The blind residents welcomed him cheerfully, unbothered by the addition. Margaret Foster even joked that it was nice to have more young people around. Willa had chosen a new book as promised, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. As she began to read, Zachary found the experience entirely different from listening outside. He could watch her now, see the way her expressions changed with the narrative, the way she used her hands occasionally to emphasize a point. He could see the rapt attention of the listeners, the small smiles when she voiced a humorous line, the way they leaned forward during tense moments. But more than that, he felt part of something. For so long, he had been on the outside of life, looking in at the warmth and connection others seemed to find so easily. Here, in this small room with these kind people and this extraordinary woman, he felt like he belonged. When the session ended, Zachary hung back as the others left, helping Willa straighten the chairs without being asked. "Thank you," she said. "You did not have to stay." "I wanted to." They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Willa said, "Did you enjoy it? Being inside, I mean." "Very much, though I admit I felt guilty taking up a chair." "Nonsense. There is always room." Willa picked up her books. "Are you walking back to your boarding house now?" "I was planning to, yes." "Would you mind if I walked with you? You are going past Mrs. Patterson's anyway." Zachary felt warmth spread through his chest. "I would like that." They fell into step together, and this time the silence between them felt natural rather than awkward. The evening was slightly cooler than the previous one, a gentle breeze stirring the dust in the streets. "Can I ask you something?" Willa said after a while, "of course. Why did you start listening? That first time, I mean. What made you stop?" Zachary considered the question. He could deflect, give some easy answer, but Willa deserved honesty. "I heard your voice," he said finally. "And it sounded like something I did not know I had been missing. Like home, maybe, though I have not had one of those in a long time." Willa stopped walking, turning to look at him fully. In the fading light, his eyes looked very blue and very sad. "I know that feeling," she said softly. "Of missing something you cannot quite name." "Yes," Zachary said. "Exactly that." They stood there in the middle of the street, two lonely people finding unexpected recognition in each other. Then Willa smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Well," she said, "perhaps we do not have to miss it anymore." From that evening on, Zachary became a regular member of Willa's reading circle. He came every night without fail, helping her carry books, tidy up afterward, and walk her home. The others welcomed him warmly, and he found himself drawn into their small community in ways that surprised him. Thomas Riley, who had been a sharpshooter before his accident, regaled him with stories from his younger days. Sarah Montgomery discussed literature with an educated passion that reminded Zachary he had once loved learning, back before survival became his only goal. Young Jacob Chen taught him about the different ways of perceiving the world, explaining how his other senses had sharpened to compensate for his lack of sight. Even Margaret Foster, who seemed to see straight through to people's souls despite her blindness, accepted him without question. But it was Willa who occupied his thoughts during the long hours in the mine. Willa with her quick smile and quicker mind. Willa who treated everyone with equal dignity and respect. Willa who read with such passion that she brought stories to life in ways he had never imagined possible. 3 weeks after that first conversation, Zachary realized he was in love with her. The realization came during an evening reading session. Willa was reading from David Copperfield, and she had just reached a particularly emotional passage. Her voice caught slightly, and Zachary saw her blink back tears even as she continued reading. She felt the story so deeply, cared so much about sharing it authentically, that it moved her to genuine emotion. In that moment, watching her fight to maintain composure for the sake of her students, Zachary understood that what he felt was more than admiration or attraction. This was love, the kind that took root deep in your chest and changed everything about how you saw the world. The knowledge both thrilled and terrified him. He had nothing to offer her, no prospects beyond his meager savings and uncertain dreams. She was educated, refined, deserved someone who could give her security and comfort. What was he but a drifter who happened to have stayed in one place a little longer than usual? After the session, as they walked through the cooling evening air, Willa noticed his unusual quietness. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No, nothing wrong. You seem preoccupied." Zachary wanted to tell her everything, wanted to pour out the feelings that were overwhelming him. But fear held his tongue. Fear of rejection, of ruining the friendship they had built, of losing this small piece of happiness he had found. "Just tired," he said. "Long day in the mine." Willa did not press, though he suspected she knew he was not being entirely truthful. They had reached Mrs. Patterson's, and she turned to face him at the gate. "Zachary, can I ask you something? Always. Why do you stay in the mines? You clearly do not love the work." "It pays steady," he said, echoing his words from their first conversation. "And I am saving money." "For what? A ranch? Someday. It is probably a foolish dream." "It is not foolish at all." Willa's voice was fierce. "Everyone deserves to dream, to work toward something better." "How much more do you need?" "Another year at least, maybe 2. Land is expensive, and I will need money for stock, equipment, building materials. It is a long way off. But you will get there. I believe that." Her faith in him was both humbling and heartbreaking. "What about you?" he asked. "What are your dreams?" Willa looked away, her gaze traveling up the street toward the dark desert beyond the town. "I want to keep doing this, the reading. Maybe expand it somehow. And I want a home, a real home, with people I love around me. Simple things, really." "Not simple at all," Zachary said. "The most important things rarely are." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, some unspoken understanding that made Willa's breath catch and Zachary's heart race. "Good night, Zachary," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Good night, Willa." He walked back to his boarding house in a daze, his mind whirling. Something had shifted between them tonight. Some invisible line had been crossed. He did not know what it meant, but he knew things could not continue as they were. He would have to either step forward or step back, and neither option seemed remotely easy. The next day was Sunday, which meant no work in the mines. Zachary spent the morning doing odd jobs around the boarding house to earn a reduction in his rent, then cleaned himself up and headed into town. He had not intended to go anywhere in particular, but his feet carried him toward Main Street, toward the little building where Willa read. He found her there, to his surprise, sitting on the front step with a book open in her lap. She looked up as he approached, shading her eyes against the bright sun. "Zachary, I did not expect to see you today. I was just walking. I can go if you are busy." "Please do not. I was just getting some air. Mrs. Patterson's parlor is lovely, but it can feel stuffy sometimes. She moved over on the step, making room. "Sit with me," he sat, very aware of how close they were, her shoulder almost touching his. He could smell the faint lavender scent she wore, could see the fine freckles across her nose that the harsh desert sun had brought out. "What are you reading?" he asked. She showed him the cover. "Poetry. I am thinking of incorporating some into the sessions, but I want to choose carefully. Not everyone loves poetry the way I do. Read me something." Willa looked surprised. "Really, please." She flipped through the pages, her fingers tracing the lines until she found what she wanted. Then, in that voice he had come to love, she read. The poem was about love, about two souls finding each other against all odds. As she read, Zachary felt each word like a physical touch, like she was speaking directly to his heart. When she finished, silence fell between them, heavy with meaning. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. "Yes," Willa agreed. "The poet understands that love is not always easy or convenient. Sometimes it is complicated and frightening, but it is worth it anyway." "Is that what you believe?" She closed the book, her hands trembling slightly. "I am beginning to think so." Zachary knew this was the moment. He could let it pass, could keep hiding behind friendly concern and casual conversation. Or he could be brave, braver than he had ever been, and risk everything for the chance at something real. "Willa, I need to tell you something." She turned to face him, her expression open and expectant. "I am listening. These past weeks, getting to know you, being part of your reading circle, it has meant more to me than I can properly express. You have given me something I did not think I could have. Hope, connection, a reason to look forward to tomorrow." He took a breath, steadying himself. "But more than that, you have given me yourself, your kindness and intelligence and beautiful spirit. And I have fallen in love with you, completely and irrevocably in love with you." Willa's eyes widened, her lips parting in surprise. For a terrible moment, Zachary thought he had made a horrible mistake, that he had misread everything. Then she smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Oh, Zachary," she breathed. "I was beginning to think you would never say it. You mean you feel the same?" "Of course I do. I think I started falling in love with you that first night when you walked me home. Maybe even before that, when I would hear someone outside the window and hope it was you." Relief and joy flooded through him in equal measure. "I do not have much to offer you. Just hard work and big dreams and a heart that is entirely yours if you want it." "That is everything," Willa said. "That is all I could ever want." He reached for her hand, and she gave it to him without hesitation. Their fingers intertwined, fitting together as though they had been designed for exactly this purpose. "I am still a year or more away from buying that land," he said. "I cannot ask you to wait that long without any certainty." "You did not ask. I am offering. And there is certainty, Zachary. I am certain about you, about us. The rest is just details." "Just details," he repeated, marveling at her confidence. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I have seen your soul," she said simply. "Every evening, listening to you talk with the others, watching how gentle you are with Thomas when he forgets what we read the day before, how patient you are with Jacob's endless questions. I see how hard you work, how you never complain. I see the man you are, and I love that man completely." Zachary lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I will work harder than ever. I will save every penny. I will give you the life you deserve." "You are already giving me that," Willa said, "just by being here, by loving me." They sat together on that step as the sun climbed higher, making plans and promises, speaking of dreams that suddenly seemed possible. Around them, the town of Calico went about its Sunday business, but they were lost in their own world, two hearts finding home in each other. That evening, they announced their understanding to the reading circle. The response was immediate and joyful. Margaret Foster declared she had seen it coming from the very beginning. Thomas Riley clapped Zachary on the shoulder and told him he was a lucky man. Sarah Montgomery offered to help Willa plan the wedding whenever they were ready. Even young Jacob, usually so serious, grinned widely and said he was happy for them both. The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Zachary's life. He and Willa settled into a comfortable rhythm. He attended the reading sessions every evening, and afterward they would walk slowly through town, talking about everything and nothing. On Sundays, they would spend hours together, sometimes taking picnics out into the desert where they could be alone, sometimes simply sitting in the shade of Mrs. Patterson's porch. Zachary worked harder than ever at the mine, often taking extra shifts when they were available. Every penny he earned went into the tin box under his bed where he kept his savings. Willa continued her reading sessions and also took a job helping Mrs. Chen at the general store 3 days a week. She saved her earnings too, insisting she wanted to contribute to their future. As autumn approached, bringing relief from the brutal summer heat, they began to talk more seriously about their plans. Zachary had been researching available land, riding out on his rare days off to survey different parcels. He found one he loved about 15 miles from Calico, 160 acres with a natural spring and enough grazing land for a decent-sized herd. The owner was asking a fair price, and Zachary calculated that if he could maintain his current pace of saving, he could make an offer by spring. Willa supported his every decision, but she also gently pushed him to think beyond the immediate practicalities. She wanted to know where they would build the house, what it would look like, how many rooms it would have. She talked about starting a small library on the ranch, a place where people from the surrounding area could come to borrow books. She spoke of teaching their future children to read, of filling their home with stories and laughter and love. These conversations terrified and exhilarated Zachary in equal measure. He had spent so long focused solely on survival that thinking about actually living, about building a life rich with meaning and connection, felt almost transgressive. But Willa had a way of making the impossible seem not only possible but inevitable. One evening in late October, after a particularly moving reading from Jane Eyre, Willa asked everyone to stay for a few extra minutes. When they were all settled again, she stood and clasped her hands together nervously. "I wanted to share some news with all of you, my dear friends. Zachary and I have decided to marry this spring after he purchases the land he has been saving for." The room erupted in cheers and congratulations. Zachary stood and moved to Willa's side, taking her hand. Looking at the happy faces of these people who had become like family to him, he felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "Thank you for welcoming me here, for accepting me. You have all given me more than you know." "Nonsense," Margaret Foster said briskly, though her smile was gentle. "You belong here, Zachary. You always have. We just helped you see it." After everyone had left and he was walking Willa home, Zachary said, "That was really happening. We are really doing this." Having second thoughts. Willa teased, not for a single moment, just marveling at my good fortune. "Our good fortune," she corrected. "I am equally lucky to have found you." They stopped at her gate and Zachary pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucking under his chin. They stood that way for a long moment, swaying slightly in the cool evening breeze. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "More than I knew it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," she said against his chest. Now and always. Winter in the Mojave Desert was mild compared to what Willa had known in Colorado, but the nights grew cold, and occasional rain turned the dusty streets to mud. The mine slowed slightly during these months, which meant fewer extra shifts, but Zachary picked up work helping with repairs around town to supplement his income. Willa's reading sessions continued faithfully, though they sometimes had to close the window against the cold. The circle had grown, with 3 new members joining in November. Word of Willa's generosity had spread, and more blind residents of Calico and the surrounding areas had sought her out. She welcomed them all, somehow managing to maintain the intimate, warm atmosphere even as the group expanded. For Christmas, Zachary used some of his precious savings to buy Willa a beautiful leather-bound journal. She had mentioned once that she wished she could write down some of her thoughts about the books they read, the conversations they had with the circle. He had saved for 2 months to afford it, and the joy on her face when she opened it made every penny worthwhile. Willa gave him a quilt she had made herself, working on it secretly during her lunch hours at the general store. It was pieced together from scraps of fabric in blues and greens, and she had embroidered their initials in one corner. That night, lying under the thin blanket in his cold boarding house room, Zachary spread the quilt over himself and felt warmer than he had in years. January brought surprising news. The owner of the land Zachary wanted was planning to move east sooner than expected and offered to sell to Zachary immediately if he could come up with 3/4 of the asking price now, and the rest within 6 months. Zachary counted his savings and came up just short. He was agonizing over what to do when Willa appeared at the mine one afternoon, something she had never done before. "I heard about the land," she said without preamble. "How much do you need?" "Willa, no, I am not taking your savings." "They are our savings. We are a partnership, remember. What does it matter whose tin box the money comes from? It matters to me. I want to provide for you." "You are providing for us," she insisted. "This is our future, our ranch, our home. Let me help build it." They argued about it for 3 days, the first real disagreement of their relationship. Finally, Thomas Riley intervened during a reading session, calling them both stubborn fools who were letting pride get in the way of sense. "The girl wants to help," he said bluntly, "and you need the help. Swallow your pride, son, and accept the gift for what it is, an act of love." Zachary had looked at Willa, seeing the determination in her eyes, and finally nodded. "Together, then. Everything together." "Everything together," she agreed. They combined their savings and went to the landowner the next morning. By noon, Zachary Granger was the legal owner of 160 acres of California land, and the impossible dream he had carried for years was suddenly, miraculously real. That evening, instead of the reading session, they took everyone from the circle out to see the property. It was quite an undertaking, arranging transportation for everyone, but they managed it with the help of borrowed wagons and generous friends. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Zachary described the land to those who could not see it, painting pictures with words the way Willa had taught him. "There is the spring I told you about, just over that rise. The water runs clear and cold, even in summer. And there, that flat area near those Joshua trees, that is where we will build the house, facing east so we can see the sunrise. The mountains are in the distance, purple and blue, and the sky seems to go on forever." Margaret Foster reached out and put her hand on his arm. "I can see it," she said. "Through your words I can see it perfectly. It is beautiful, Zachary. You have chosen well." Willa stood close to him, her hand in his, and felt tears of happiness sliding down her cheeks. This was real. Their life together was beginning. They began planning the wedding for April, after the worst of the winter weather had passed, but before the summer heat became unbearable. Willa wanted something simple, just their friends from the reading circle and a few others they had grown close to in Calico. Sarah Montgomery offered her daughter's help with making a dress, and Mrs. Patterson insisted on hosting the celebration dinner at her boarding house. Zachary focused on beginning work on the ranch. He could not afford to hire help yet, so he spent every free moment out on the land, clearing the building site, marking where fences would go, planning the layout of barn and corrals. It was back-breaking work on top of his regular shifts at the mine, and Willa worried he was pushing himself too hard. "I am fine," he assured her when she expressed her concerns. "I have never been better, actually. I am building something, Willa, our future. How could I be anything but happy?" Still, she insisted he take at least one full day off each week, and on those Sundays they would pack a lunch and ride out to the property together. Willa was learning to ride, something she had never done in Colorado, and though she was not yet confident, she enjoyed the freedom of it. On one such Sunday in early March, they were sitting by the spring, eating bread and cheese and watching clouds drift across the impossibly blue sky. Willa had been quiet all morning, and Zachary could tell something was on her mind. "What is it?" he asked finally. "You have been thinking so hard I can practically hear it." She smiled but did not quite meet his eyes. "I have been offered a position, teaching at the school in Calico. The current teacher is retiring, and she recommended me for the job. It would pay better than the general store, and I could still do the reading sessions in the evenings." "That is wonderful news. Why do you look worried?" "It would mean committing to stay in Calico, at least for a while. I know you want to move out here to the ranch as soon as possible, and it is so far from town. I would not be able to ride back and forth every day, especially in winter." Zachary set down his food and took both her hands in his. "Willa, look at me." She raised her eyes to his. "This ranch, this land, it is important to me. But it is not more important than you, than your dreams and your work. If teaching is something you want to do, you should do it. We will figure out the rest. But I know how much you want to live out here. And I will, eventually. We will. But there is no rush. We can stay in town for a few years while you teach. I can continue working at the mine, build up the ranch slowly. Or maybe I can find work in town that pays better. There are many possible paths forward, Willa. We just have to choose them together." She leaned forward and kissed him, a soft, sweet kiss that still had the power to make his heart race. "How did I get so lucky?" she whispered. "I ask myself the same question every day." She accepted the teaching position, and Zachary found himself oddly relieved. Truth be told, the thought of Willa being alone on the ranch all day while he worked had worried him. There would be time enough for isolation later. For now, it made sense for them to stay in town, to continue building their community and their savings. April arrived with wildflowers blooming across the desert in an unexpected riot of color. A late winter rain had brought more moisture than usual, and the landscape transformed into something almost magical. Willa took it as a good omen for their wedding. The ceremony was held at the small church in Calico on a Saturday afternoon. Willa wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Patterson and Sarah Montgomery's daughter had helped her make, with a crown of desert wildflowers in her hair. Zachary wore a new suit, the first he had ever owned, purchased with money he had been saving for months. As he stood at the altar watching Willa walk toward him, Zachary felt his eyes burn with tears. She was so beautiful, but more than that, she was his. This incredible woman had chosen him, had seen past his rough exterior and lack of prospects to the heart of who he was. He would spend the rest of his life proving worthy of that choice. The vows were traditional, but when they spoke them, every word carried the weight of genuine promise. To love and to cherish, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death parted them. Zachary meant every syllable with his entire being, when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, and Zachary kissed Willa for the first time as her husband, the small congregation erupted in cheers. Thomas Riley whistled loudly, and Margaret Foster wiped away happy tears she could not see. The celebration at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was joyful and lasted well into the evening. There was food and music, and even some dancing. Zachary, who had never danced in his life, let Willa teach him the basic steps, stumbling and laughing as she guided him around the room. "You are terrible at this," she said, but she was smiling. "I know, but I am enjoying it anyway. That is all that matters." When the party finally wound down and the guests departed, Zachary and Willa rode out to the ranch. They had spent the past month building a small cabin, just 2 rooms for now, but it was theirs. Zachary had built the bed frame himself, and Sarah Montgomery had donated an old mattress stuffed with straw. It was not much, but as Zachary carried Willa over the threshold, it felt like a palace. They made love for the first time that night, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence and passion. Afterward, lying tangled together under Willa's quilt, Zachary felt a peace he had never known before. This was what he had been searching for all those years of drifting. Not just a place to live, but someone to live for. Home was not 4 walls and a roof. Home was Willa, her heartbeat steady against his chest, her breath warm on his skin. "I love you, Mrs. Granger," he whispered into the darkness. "I love you too, Mr. Granger," she whispered back. Life settled into a new rhythm after the wedding. Willa started teaching at the school, and she loved it. Her students ranged from 6 to 14, children of miners and shopkeepers and the few ranchers in the area. She brought the same passion to teaching them that she brought to her evening reading sessions, and the children adored her. Zachary continued working at the mine but cut back his hours slightly. He needed time to work on the ranch, building corrals and a small barn, repairing fences, preparing for the day when they could afford to buy cattle. He also wanted to spend time with his wife, to have dinner with her most evenings, to fall asleep beside her each night. They kept a small room at Mrs. Patterson's for nights when they stayed in town, which was most of the time during the school year. But every weekend they rode out to the ranch, and slowly, piece by piece, they built their dream. The reading sessions continued, now held at the school building since it was larger and more centrally located. The circle had grown to 12 regular members, plus occasional visitors. Willa still led the readings, but Zachary had begun to participate more, sometimes taking turns reading or leading discussions. He found he had a knack for it, and Willa's pride in him was evident. One evening in June, after a particularly lively discussion about Moby Dick, young Jacob Chen approached Zachary privately. "I wanted to thank you," Jacob said. "For what?" "For showing me that being blind does not mean being helpless. You treat us all like equals, like people with minds and opinions that matter. Not everyone does that." Zachary was moved. "You are people with minds and opinions that matter. Your blindness does not change that. I know that now. Because of you and Willa, I know that. I have been thinking I might like to learn a trade, become a craftsman of some kind. My hands are skilled, even if my eyes do not work. I think I could do it." "I know you could," Zachary said firmly, "and Willa and I will help you however we can." True to his word, Zachary spent time over the following weeks introducing Jacob to various craftsmen in town, helping him explore different options. Eventually, Jacob apprenticed with a leather worker who was willing to teach him despite his blindness. It was the beginning of what would become a successful career for Jacob, and both he and his family credited Zachary and Willa with making it possible. Summer brought intense heat back to the desert, and Willa's teaching took a break until fall. They spent most of their time at the ranch during these months, working from dawn until the heat became unbearable, resting in the afternoon, then working again in the evening. It was hard, exhausting labor, but it was satisfying in a way Zachary had never experienced. Every fence post he set, every board he nailed, every rock he cleared was an investment in their future. In August, Willa discovered she was pregnant. She told Zachary one evening as they sat outside the cabin watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. For a moment he could not speak, overwhelmed by the magnitude of it. They were going to have a child. He was going to be a father. "Are you happy?" Willa asked tentatively, worried by his silence. "Happy," he repeated, then pulled her into his arms. "I am terrified and overjoyed and completely unprepared and so happy I could burst." "Is that normal?" She laughed, relieved. "I think it is exactly normal." They told the reading circle the following week, and again the response was enthusiastic. Everyone had advice, from Margaret Foster's old remedies for morning sickness to Thomas Riley's colorful warnings about sleepless nights. Sarah Montgomery knitted tiny booties. Mrs. Patterson started collecting baby clothes from families whose children had outgrown them. Zachary threw himself into preparing for the baby with the same intensity he brought to everything. He built a cradle from oak, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, so there would be no chance of splinters against tender skin. He added another room onto the cabin, a nursery with windows facing east to catch the morning light. He worked extra shifts at the mine, saving every penny for the expenses a child would bring. Willa continued teaching into the fall, though she planned to take a break once the baby arrived. She also continued the reading sessions, her growing belly a visible reminder of the life she and Zachary were building together. On a cool evening in late October, as Willa read from Little Women, Zachary sat watching her and marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. 2 years ago, he had been alone, hopeless, drifting through life with no anchor. Now he had a wife he adored, a child on the way, land of his own, and a community of friends who felt like family. All because he had stopped one evening to listen to a woman reading to the blind, and had seen, in her beautiful soul, a reflection of everything good he wanted to be. Willa looked up from the book and caught him staring. She smiled, that special smile she reserved just for him, and mouthed, "I love you." He mouthed it back, feeling the truth of it down to his bones. The baby arrived on a cold February night in 1887 after a labor that lasted 12 hours and left both Willa and Zachary exhausted. But when the midwife placed the squalling infant in Willa's arms and announced it was a healthy boy, every moment of fear and pain was forgotten. "A son," Zachary breathed, looking down at the tiny red face screwed up in protest at being born. "We have a son. What should we name him?" Willa asked, her voice weak but happy. They had discussed names for months but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at his child, Zachary knew exactly what felt right. "William," he said, "after your father, so he will always carry that legacy of strength and hard work." Willa's eyes filled with tears. "William Granger. It is perfect." Little William was a healthy baby with strong lungs and an appetite that astonished everyone. He thrived despite the harsh desert environment, and watching him grow became Zachary's greatest joy. He would spend hours just watching the baby sleep, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes, the way William's face would scrunch up before he woke crying to be fed. Willa recovered quickly from the birth, and after a month of rest, resumed her teaching. She brought William with her to school, and he became a sort of class mascot. The older girls fought for the privilege of holding him during lunch, and even the rough and tumble boys were gentle around the baby. The reading sessions also continued, with William sleeping peacefully in his cradle in the corner while Willa read. The circle members adored him, and Margaret Foster in particular, seemed to have a gift for soothing him when he fussed. "I raised 5 of my own," she explained when Zachary marveled at her skill. "Some things you never forget, sight or no sight." Life was busy but good. Zachary had finally saved enough to buy a small herd of cattle, 20 head to start. It was not much, but it was a beginning. He hired a local teenager to help him drive them from the seller's ranch to his own property. And the day he watched those cattle grazing on his land was one of the proudest of his life. The ranch was becoming a real operation now, not just a dream. He still worked at the mine part-time to ensure steady income, but more and more of his energy went into the cattle business. It was hard work, but it was his work, and that made all the difference. When William was 6 months old, they made the decision to move to the ranch full-time. Willa would continue teaching, riding into town 3 days a week and staying at Mrs. Patterson's those nights. It was not ideal, being apart so often, but it was necessary, and they both understood that building their dream required sacrifices. Zachary proved to be a devoted father, taking over William's care on the days Willa was in town. He learned to change diapers, to warm milk, to sing the lullabies Willa had taught him. The ranch hands he occasionally hired were amused to see their tough boss walking the property with a baby strapped to his chest, but Zachary did not care. William was his son, and he wanted to be present for every moment he could. The reading sessions moved to a weekend schedule to accommodate Willa's new arrangements. Every Saturday evening, the circle members would make the journey out to the ranch. It was more difficult for them, especially in bad weather, but no one complained. If anything, they seemed to enjoy the adventure of it, the change of scenery even if they could not see it. Zachary built a large room onto the cabin specifically for these gatherings, with comfortable chairs and good lighting. Willa filled it with books, her collection having grown substantially over the years. It became a place of warmth and welcome, a community space that meant as much to Zachary as it did to Willa. 2 years after William's birth, Willa became pregnant again. This time Zachary was less terrified and more excited, though he worried about Willa managing 2 small children while still teaching. But she was determined to continue working as long as she could, and he supported her decision. Their daughter was born on a blazing hot day in July 1889. The labor was faster this time, only 6 hours, and the baby came out screaming her displeasure at the heat. They named her Grace, because Willa said she was a gift of grace they had not known they needed. Grace was different from William in every way. Where he had been placid and easy, she was fiery and demanding. Where he had been content to observe, she wanted to be in the middle of everything. Zachary adored her instantly. "She is going to be a handful," Willa said one evening as Grace fought sleep despite obvious exhaustion. "She takes after her mother," Zachary replied with a grin. "Stubborn and beautiful and impossible to ignore." "I am not stubborn." "You are the most stubborn person I have ever met. It is one of the things I love most about you." Willa laughed, too tired to argue. Grace finally fell asleep, and they sat together in the rocking chair Zachary had made, the baby cradled between them, William sleeping peacefully in his small bed across the room. "We have made a good life," Willa said softly. "Have I told you that lately?" "You have. But I never get tired of hearing it." "A good life," she repeated. "With a good man, I am very blessed." "We both are," Zachary said, kissing the top of her head. The years flowed by like water, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. The ranch grew steadily, the herd increasing until Zachary was able to quit the mine entirely and focus on cattle full-time. Willa eventually stopped teaching to raise their growing family. 2 more children came, another boy they named Thomas after Thomas Riley, and a daughter they called Sarah after Sarah Montgomery. The reading circle continued faithfully, a constant in their changing lives. The original members grew older, some passed away, but new people always joined. It became a tradition in Calico, Willa Granger's weekend reading sessions at the ranch. People traveled from as far as 50 miles to attend, and Willa welcomed them all. Jacob Chen, who had become a master leather worker, married and had children of his own. He still came to the reading sessions and brought his family. His success inspired others with disabilities to believe in their own potential, and Willa and Zachary took quiet pride in the role they had played in that. Thomas Riley passed away peacefully in his sleep when William was 8 years old. The funeral was well attended, and Zachary gave the eulogy, speaking about the old sharpshooter's kindness and wisdom. Little Thomas, named for him, placed a flower on the grave, too young to fully understand but sensing the solemnity of the moment. Margaret Foster lived to be 93, sharp as ever until the very end. She died the winter Grace turned 10, and her last words to Willa were, "I told you I saw it coming. You and that cowboy I knew from the start." Sarah Montgomery's sight began to return unexpectedly in her 70s. The doctors could not explain it, but gradually she regained enough vision to see shapes and light. The first thing she asked to see was Willa's face. When Willa stood before her, Sarah had wept and said, "You are exactly as beautiful as I imagined." Through it all, Zachary and Willa's love deepened and matured. They had their disagreements, of course, their moments of frustration and stress. Raising 4 children while running a ranch was not easy. Money was sometimes tight. The desert could be unforgiving, and they lost cattle to drought one terrible year. But they faced everything together, as they had promised they would. Every hardship brought them closer. Every triumph was sweeter because they shared it. They made a point of taking time for each other, of not letting the demands of life overwhelm the connection that had brought them together in the first place. On their 15th anniversary, Zachary surprised Willa with a gift. He led her out to a newly constructed building on the property, larger than any of the others, with big windows and sturdy shelves lining the walls. "What is this?" she asked, though she had already guessed. "It is a library. A real one, not just a room in our house." For the reading sessions, yes, but also for anyone in the area who wants to borrow books. You always talked about starting a library, remember? Well, now you have one. Willa walked through the space, her hand trailing over the smooth wooden shelves. Her books were already arranged there, hundreds of them collected over the years, and there was room for hundreds more. "Zachary," she breathed, "this must have cost a fortune." "It was worth every penny. You have given so much to this community, to me, to our family. You deserve to have your dream." She turned and threw her arms around him, holding him tight. "You are my dream," she said. "Everything else is just wonderful extras." The library became exactly what Willa had envisioned, a gathering place for the community, a resource for those hungry for knowledge and stories. She organized the books carefully, kept records of who borrowed what, and slowly built the collection with donations and occasional purchases. Their children grew tall and strong, each inheriting different aspects of their parents' personalities. William was serious and hardworking like his father, with his mother's love of learning. Grace was fiery and independent, always pushing boundaries, but with a kind heart that revealed itself in unexpected moments. Thomas was the gentle one, thoughtful and artistic, always sketching the desert landscape. Sarah was the social butterfly, making friends wherever she went, bringing people together with her natural warmth. Zachary watched them grow with a mixture of pride and wistfulness. Where had the time gone? It seemed like yesterday he was listening outside a window, too afraid to step into the light. Now he was a man of means, respected in the community, a husband and father. The scared, lonely drifter he had been felt like a different person entirely. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Willa took his hand. "You ever think about that first night?" she asked. "When you were standing outside the window listening, all the time," he admitted. "I think about how close I came to just walking past, to never stopping." "I am glad you stopped. So am I. It changed my entire life." "It changed both our lives," Willa corrected. "I was lonely too, going through the motions, trying to find meaning after losing my father. The reading sessions helped, but something was still missing. Then you came along and everything clicked into place." "I saw your beautiful soul," Zachary said softly. "That is what drew me in, not just your voice or your kindness, but the essence of who you are. It shone through everything you did." "And I saw yours," Willa said. "A good man trying to find his way home. I am so glad home turned out to be with me." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from orange to pink to purple. In the distance, they could hear their children playing, William supervising the younger ones as they chased fireflies. The cattle lowed softly from the pasture. The desert air was cooling, bringing relief from the day's heat. "We have built something good here," Zachary said finally. "Something that will last beyond us. The ranch, yes, but more than that. The library, the reading sessions, the community we have fostered, the love we have modeled for our children. It will all continue, ripple outward, touch lives we will never know about." "That is a beautiful thought. It is a true thought. You started something special, Willa, when you decided to read to those who could not see. You gave them dignity and entertainment and connection. You gave me everything. That kind of gift does not end, it multiplies." Willa leaned her head on his shoulder. "We gave each other everything. I could not have done any of this without you. We make a good team, the best team." As darkness fully settled over the desert, they went inside to gather their children for bed. The nightly ritual of stories and tucking in took the better part of an hour, but neither of them minded. These moments were precious, fleeting. Soon enough, their children would be grown and gone, building lives of their own. Later, lying in bed with Willa curled against his side, Zachary thought about the path his life had taken. If someone had told that lonely young cowboy standing outside the window that he would end up here, loved and loving, surrounded by family and purpose, he never would have believed it. It seemed too good, too far beyond what someone like him deserved. But here he was, living proof that redemption was possible, that love could heal the deepest wounds, that home was not a place you found but something you built with the people you cherished. "I love you," he whispered to Willa, though she was already asleep. The words had become his prayer, his anchor, his truth. Years continued to pass in their predictable yet precious rhythm. William grew into a fine young man and married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch. They built a house on the far edge of Zachary and Willa's property and started their own family. Zachary became a grandfather at 52, holding his grandson and marveling at the continuation of the line he had never thought he would have. Grace, true to her nature, shocked everyone by becoming a teacher like her mother, but in a school for the blind in San Francisco. She had grown up watching her mother's reading sessions and had developed a passion for helping those with disabilities. Willa cried tears of pride when Grace told them of her plans. Thomas discovered a talent for animal husbandry and took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch while Zachary gradually stepped back. He was good at it, innovative and patient, and under his care, the ranch prospered even more. Sarah married a doctor and moved to Sacramento, where she became involved in various charitable works. She wrote home regularly, long letters full of news and affection, and visited whenever she could. Through it all, The reading sessions continued. Willa was now in her 60s, her auburn hair gone silver, but her voice remained strong and clear. Zachary still attended every session, sitting in the same chair he had chosen that first night he had come inside. He was older now, his body bearing the marks of hard work and time, but his love for Willa had never wavered. New generations attended the sessions now, grandchildren of the original members, newcomers to the area who had heard about the legendary Willa Granger and her library. The building had been expanded twice to accommodate everyone, and there was talk of making it an official public library with county funding. Zachary was against the idea at first, worried that bureaucracy would change the essential nature of what Willa had created. But she convinced him that growth was not betrayal, that reaching more people was the whole point. "We cannot keep this to ourselves," she argued. "The more people who have access to books, to stories, to the kind of community we have built, the better. Is that not worth a little change?" She was right, as she usually was, and he eventually agreed. The county came through with funding, and Willa's library officially became the Calico County Public Library, with Willa as its first official librarian. On Zachary's 65th birthday, the town of Calico threw a celebration in his honor. It surprised him, as he had never thought of himself as particularly noteworthy. But the mayor gave a speech about all that Zachary had contributed to the community, not just as a successful rancher, but as a mentor to young men looking to make their way, as a supporter of the library, as a devoted husband and father. "Zachary Granger came to us as a stranger," the mayor said. "A young man with nothing but a strong back and the will to work. He could have remained isolated, focused only on his own survival. Instead, he let love transform him. He built a family, a business, a community. He is the embodiment of what makes Calico great." Zachary was embarrassed by the attention but deeply moved. Looking out at the crowd, he saw so many faces he knew and loved. His children and grandchildren, his neighbors and friends, the people he had worked beside, laughed with, supported and been supported by. This was his legacy, these connections, these relationships built over decades of showing up and caring. Willa squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with tears. "You deserve this," she whispered. "All of it." That night, after everyone had gone home and they were alone in the house they had built together, Zachary said, "You know what the best moment of my life was? Our wedding," Willa guessed. "That was one of them, certainly. But the very best moment was that evening I finally got the courage to come inside, when you invited me to sit down and be part of something instead of just watching from the outside. That was when my real life began." "Mine too," Willa said. "I did not realize it at the time, but I was waiting for you, for someone who would see me, really see me, not just the surface but the soul underneath." "I did see you," Zachary said. "I saw your beautiful soul and it saved me. We saved each other." They held each other close, two people who had found their way home through the simple act of recognizing something true in each other. Outside, the desert night was cool and still. Inside, the house they had filled with love and laughter held them safe. Zachary and Willa lived into their 80s, still together, still in love. When Willa became too frail to read aloud for long periods, Zachary took over, reading to her now as she had once read to so many others. His voice had grown rougher with age, but to Willa, it was the most beautiful sound in the world. They passed away within 6 months of each other, Willa first and then Zachary, as though he had only been waiting to ensure she was settled before joining her. Their children and grandchildren mourned them deeply, but took comfort in knowing they had lived full, meaningful lives. The library continued, renamed the Granger Memorial Library in their honor. The reading sessions for the blind continued too, carried on by Grace when she eventually returned to Calico, and then by her daughter after her. It became a family tradition, a living monument to the power of stories and the importance of seeing beyond the surface to the soul beneath. Years later, when great-grandchildren asked about Zachary and Willa, the stories that were told always came back to that essential truth. That love begins when you truly see another person, when you recognize their beautiful soul and allow it to change you. Everything else, all the practical details of building a life, flows from that moment of recognition. Zachary had been a cowboy, alone and adrift. Willa had been a woman reading to the blind, generous but lonely. Together, they had built something that lasted, a love story that became legend in Calico, a testament to the transformative power of seeing and being seen. And every evening, as the sun set over the Mojave Desert, you could almost hear Willa's voice carrying on the wind, reading stories to those who gathered to listen, while somewhere in the shadows, a young cowboy stood transfixed, seeing for the first time what it meant to come home. The Granger Ranch still stood decades later, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story. The library flourished, becoming one of the finest in the region. The reading sessions never stopped, an unbroken chain of connection and community that stretched back to that first night when Willa decided to share the gift of stories with those who could no longer see the written word. In the archives of the library, carefully preserved, was Willa's original journal, the one Zachary had given her that first Christmas. In it, she had written about her life, her thoughts on the books she read, her observations about the people she loved. But the entry that was most often requested, most frequently quoted, was from early in her relationship with Zachary. "Today I realized something profound," she had written in her careful script. "I have been reading to the blind, helping them see through words, but I was blind too in my own way. Blind to the possibility of love, to the chance of building a real future. Then Zachary came and he saw me. Not the surface, not the performance, but the truth of who I am. And in his seeing, I learned to see too. We are all blind to some things, I think, until the right person comes along and opens our eyes." Those words, simple and true, captured the essence of their love story. Two people finding each other in the desert, in a small town at the edge of nowhere, learning that home is not a place, but a person who truly sees you. The story of Willa and Zachary Granger became part of Calico's history, told and retold, slightly different each time but always containing that central truth. Visitors to the town would ask about the library, about the reading sessions, and locals would smile and say, "It all started with a woman reading to the blind and a cowboy who listened and saw her beautiful soul." And so the legacy continued, touching generation after generation, proving that one act of kindness, one moment of truly seeing another person, can ripple out into eternity, changing lives in ways we can never fully comprehend. Zachary and Willa could not have known, that first evening when their eyes met, that they were beginning something that would last beyond their lifetimes. They only knew they had found each other, and that was enough. In the end, that is what every great love story teaches us, that we are never truly alone as long as we are willing to be seen, to let someone past our walls and defenses to the vulnerable truth beneath. Willa and Zachary had the courage to do that, and in doing so, they created something beautiful that would never fade. The desert sunset that painted the sky in brilliant colors every evening was their benediction, a daily reminder that even in harsh and unforgiving places, beauty can bloom. That even when we feel most isolated, connection is possible. That love, true love, begins with seeing and being seen. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived on the ranch, still maintained the library, still held the reading sessions every weekend. The tradition had become sacred, a link to the past and a bridge to the future. Children grew up hearing about Zachary and Willa, learning from their example what it meant to build a life of meaning and purpose. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, people swore they could hear it. A woman's voice, clear and strong, reading tales of adventure and romance. And if you listened very carefully, you might also hear the sound of a cowboy's boots, scuffing gently on wooden floorboards as he found the courage to step out of the shadows and into the light. The story had ended, but it had also never ended. Like all true love stories, it continued in the hearts of those who heard it, inspiring them to open their eyes, to look beyond the surface, to recognize the beautiful souls around them and dare to be recognized in return. Zachary and Willa Granger had lived and loved and built something that mattered. They had seen each other truly, completely, and that seeing had transformed them both. It was a simple story, really, but simple stories are often the most profound. A woman read to the blind every evening. A cowboy listened and saw her beautiful soul. They fell in love, built a life, and created a legacy that would never die. And in that, they achieved a kind of immortality that had nothing to do with fame or fortune and everything to do with love, connection, and the courage to truly see.